The evening air hung heavy with humidity as Eleanor Washington stepped out of her black town car in front of the Grand Monarch Hotel. At 72 years old, her body felt every minute of the 14-hour flight from Tokyo, but her mind remained sharp as ever. She straightened her simple navy blazer, smoothed down her gray curls, and nodded to the driver who placed her well-worn leather luggage beside her. "Thank you, Robert," she said, pressing a generous tip into his palm. "You always make these airport runs bearable." The doorman stood nearby, attentively helping a young white couple with their mountain of designer suitcases. Eleanor waited patiently, her tired eyes taking in the gleaming glass entrance of the hotel. Her hotel, though the paperwork had only been finalized last month. The acquisition of the Grand Monarch was the crown jewel in her 4-decade journey, building Washington Hospitality Group, a company she'd started with a single roadside motel in Alabama, back when most banks wouldn't even give her a business loan. After several minutes, the doorman finally noticed her standing there. He gave her a quick once-over, noting her practical travel clothes and lack of flashy jewelry, before offering a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Can I help you, ma'am? Taxi stand is around the corner if you're looking." Eleanor's lips tightened slightly, but her voice remained pleasant. "I'm checking in, thank you." She reached for her luggage handle herself and walked through the revolving doors that the young man didn't bother holding for her. The lobby sparkled with crystal, chandeliers and marble floors that reflected the warm lighting. Business travelers and tourists mingled in plush seating areas while efficient staff moved about with purpose. Eleanor took a deep breath, inhaling the signature scent her company had developed for all their properties, subtle notes of cedar and vanilla designed to make guests feel instantly at home. At the front desk, 3 employees chatted amongst themselves. One was helping a man in a tailored suit, while the others seemed to be sharing a joke. Eleanor stood at the empty station, waiting to be acknowledged. 2 minutes passed before a young man with slicked back hair and a name tag, reading James, finally turned to her. "Good evening," he said, his eyes already moving past her to scan the lobby for more important guests. "How can I help you?" "I'd like to check in, please. I have a reservation for the presidential suite," Eleanor said, keeping her voice warm despite her exhaustion. James's eyebrows rose slightly. He tapped at his computer keyboard without looking up. "Your name?" "Washington. Eleanor Washington." More typing, followed by a skeptical glance. "I'm not seeing any reservation under that name for the presidential suite." Eleanor reached into her purse for her phone. "That's strange. I received confirmation just yesterday." She pulled up the email and turned the screen toward him. James barely glanced at it. There must be some mistake. The presidential suite is quite expensive, over $5,000 per night. He emphasized the amount as if explaining a difficult concept to a child. "Perhaps you meant to book a standard room? Or maybe you're at the wrong hotel?" A well-dressed couple approached the desk beside her. Without missing a beat, another receptionist greeted them with genuine warmth. "Welcome back to the Grand Monarch, Mr. and Mrs. Chen. We've prepared your usual corner room with the city view you love." Eleanor observed the interaction quietly, her tired mind cataloging every difference in how she was being treated. 40 years of building a hotel empire had taught her to notice these details. "No," she said firmly but politely to James. "I'm certain my reservation is for the presidential suite at this hotel. Could you please check again? The confirmation number is right here." She pointed to her screen. James sighed, making no effort to hide his annoyance. "Listen, ma'am, there are several budget hotels down on 8th Street that might be more suitable for your needs. I'd be happy to call one for you." The couple beside her received their room keys with complimentary champagne vouchers for the hotel bar. Eleanor's patience was wearing thin, but decades of similar encounters had perfected her calm exterior. "I'd like to speak with your manager, please." James rolled his eyes slightly before catching himself. "Of course. One moment." He picked up a phone and murmured something Eleanor couldn't quite hear. A few minutes later, a man in his 40s with thinning hair and an expensive watch appeared. His name tag read, Michael Winters, General Manager. He approached with a practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. Good evening. I understand there's some confusion about a reservation. Eleanor extended her hand. Eleanor Washington. There seems to be an issue with my presidential suite booking. Michael shook her hand briefly, his grip notably less firm than it would have been for other guests. Mrs. Washington, I've checked our system personally and I don't see any reservation under your name for our presidential suite. Perhaps there's been a misunderstanding. The lobby lights reflected off the marble floors as Eleanor stood straight despite her fatigue. Several nearby guests had begun to notice the conversation, some watching with undisguised curiosity. It's Ms. Washington, actually, she corrected gently. And there's no misunderstanding. She reached into her purse again, this time pulling out not her phone but a small leather wallet. With calm precision, she placed 2 cards on the counter. The first was her company ID card with her photograph and the title, Founder and CEO, Washington Hospitality Group. The second was a founder's gold card, issued only to the owners of hotel properties within her growing empire. I acquired this hotel last month, she said evenly. This is my property now, and I believe there are several things we need to discuss. About customer service standards. The color drained from Michael's face as he stared at the cards. James, who had been watching from nearby, suddenly found great interest in his computer screen. The security cameras mounted discreetly in the ceiling corners captured the entire interaction, including the moment when realization transformed. Their expressions from condescension to horror. Eleanor's voice remained calm but now carried an unmistakable authority. Now, about that presidential suite. The silence in the hotel lobby felt heavy enough to touch. Eleanor Washington stood perfectly still, her company ID and founder's gold card gleaming under the crystal chandelier lights. Michael, the manager, stared at the cards with his mouth slightly open, looking like someone had just pulled the floor from beneath his feet. I don't understand, he finally stammered, picking up the gold founder's card with trembling fingers. The acquisition was supposed to be confidential until next month's press release, Eleanor finished for him, her voice calm but firm. Yes, it was. I decided to visit incognito to experience the hotel as a regular guest would. She glanced around the marble lobby, noting how several staff members were now watching with undisguised interest. It seems that was a revealing decision. James, the receptionist, had gone completely pale. His fingers hovered uselessly over his keyboard as he struggled to process what was happening. The confidence that had allowed him to suggest budget accommodations to Eleanor just minutes ago had evaporated entirely. Ms. Washington, Michael said, straightening his tie nervously. There's clearly been a terrible misunderstanding. If you'll allow me to, Eleanor held up a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. What's happened here isn't a misunderstanding, Mr. Winters. It's a reflection of your staff culture. Despite her exhaustion from the long flight, her eyes were sharp and focused. And culture always starts at the top. A small crowd of curious guests had begun to gather at a polite distance, sensing the tension in the air. The front desk staff looked increasingly uncomfortable as Eleanor reached into her bag and pulled out her phone again. Let me show you something, she said, opening an app that connected to the hotel's security system, access she'd been granted as the new owner. With a few taps, she pulled up footage from just 10 minutes earlier and turned the screen toward Michael. On the screen, they watched Eleanor's arrival. How the doorman had ignored her until helping the younger white couple. How James had immediately assumed she couldn't afford the presidential suite, and how Michael himself had approached with that condescending smile. Eleanor turned the phone around and stopped the playback. Tell me, Mr. Winters, is this how you train your staff to treat all guests? Or just the elderly black ones who don't arrive in limousines? Michael's face flushed red. Ms. Washington, I assure you that discrimination of any kind is absolutely not our policy. We value all our guests equally, regardless of actions speak louder than policies, Eleanor interrupted, her tone never rising but carrying unmistakable weight. I've been in this industry for 47 years. Started as a housekeeper, worked my way up to owning my first small motel and built from there. Do you know what I've learned in all that time? She didn't wait for his answer. I've learned that how you treat people when you think they can't do anything for you reveals who you truly are. By now, the lobby had grown noticeably quieter. Even the bartender at the far end had stopped mixing drinks to watch. The weight of the moment pressed down on everyone present. James finally found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "Ms. Washington, I'm truly sorry for how I treated you. There's no excuse for my behavior." Eleanor turned to him, her expression softening slightly. "You're right. There isn't. But there is always room for growth and learning." She picked up her ID and founder's card, returning them to her purse. "Now, about that presidential suite," Michael snapped back to attention. "Yes, of course. Let me personally escort you up right away. Your luggage will be carried by you," Eleanor finished, gesturing to her 2 leather bags. "Consider it your first lesson in humility." The general manager blinked in surprise but quickly nodded, reaching for her bags. As he lifted them, Eleanor turned to address the growing number of staff who had gathered nearby. "I'd like everyone available to meet in the main conference room at 8 a.m. tomorrow. We have important matters to discuss." Her voice was clear and carried across the lobby. "And please inform the night shift as well. I'll be conducting a full review of our service standards." A young woman from housekeeping raised her hand hesitantly. "Excuse me, ma'am, but how should we address you now? As the owner or—" Eleanor smiled for the first time since entering the hotel. "My name is Eleanor Washington. That's all anyone has ever needed to know to show me basic respect." She glanced at Michael, who stood awkwardly holding her luggage. "Those who know me will call me Ellie." As they walked toward the private elevator that would take them to the presidential suite, whispers erupted throughout the lobby. A bellhop pulled out his phone, frantically searching Eleanor's name online. His eyes widened as he showed his screen to coworkers nearby. "That's her," he whispered urgently. "That's really her, the woman who started with nothing and built one of the biggest independent hotel chains in the country." In the elevator, Michael stood uncomfortably with Eleanor's bags, trying to find the right words. "Ms. Washington, I want to personally apologize for—" "Save it," Eleanor said, not unkindly. "Tomorrow isn't about apologies. It's about changes." The elevator doors opened directly into the sprawling presidential suite, revealing floor-to-ceiling windows with breathtaking city views. "I'll expect a complete staff list and performance reviews on my desk by morning." "And Michael?" He looked up nervously. "Yes, Ms. Washington?" "Have someone bring up the security footage from the lobby?" "All of it from the past week." She stepped into the suite, finally allowing her shoulders to relax slightly. "You can leave the bags by the door." As Michael placed her luggage down, Eleanor noticed his hands were still shaking. She waited until he was about to leave before speaking again. "You know, most people in my position would fire you on the spot." He froze, his back to her, before slowly turning around. I understand, Ms. Washington." Eleanor studied him thoughtfully. "Lucky for you, I'm not most people. I believe in second chances, but only one. Tomorrow is yours." After Michael left, Eleanor finally allowed herself to sink into a plush armchair by the window. She kicked off her practical travel shoes and gazed out at the city lights, thinking about all the hotels she'd been turned away from as a young black woman traveling for business decades ago. She thought about the long road that had led her here, to owning the very establishments that once wouldn't serve her kind. Her phone buzzed with a message from her daughter. "How's the surprise visit going? Have they figured out who you are yet?" Eleanor smiled as she typed her reply. "Oh yes, and tomorrow they'll learn exactly what that means." At exactly 7:45 the next morning, Eleanor Washington stepped out of the private elevator into the hotel's main conference room. Despite her late night reviewing files, she looked impeccable in a tailored burgundy suit, her silver hair styled in a neat bob. She carried a leather portfolio under one arm and a cup of tea in her free hand. The room, designed to hold corporate events for up to 50 people, was already filling with nervous staff members. Some wore pressed uniforms while others were in business attire, but all shared the same anxious expressions. Eleanor noticed how they clustered together, whispering and stealing glances in her direction. She took a seat at the head of the long table and observed. By 7:55, nearly 40 employees had filed in, representing every department from housekeeping to administration. Michael, the general manager, stood near the door checking names off a list, his usual confidence replaced by visible unease. James, the receptionist from yesterday's incident, sat in the back row looking like he hadn't slept all night. At precisely 8 Eleanor stood. The room fell silent instantly. "Good morning," she said, her voice warm but firm. "For those who weren't present yesterday evening, I'm Eleanor Washington, founder and CEO of Washington Hospitality Group." She paused, letting the information settle. "As of 3 weeks ago, I am also the owner of this establishment." A few gasps came from staff members who hadn't yet heard the news. Eleanor continued, "I'm sure many of you have questions. Those will be addressed in time. First, we need to discuss what happened yesterday and, more importantly, what happens going forward." She nodded to Michael, who hurried to dim the lights. A projection screen descended from the ceiling, and footage from the previous evening began to play. There was no sound, but none was needed. The body language and facial expressions told the full story of Eleanor's arrival and the subsequent treatment she'd received. As the footage played, many staff members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some looked down, unable to watch. When the lights came back on, Eleanor remained standing, her expression thoughtful rather than angry. "I didn't show you this to shame anyone," she said, gesturing toward the screen. "What you just witnessed isn't unique to this hotel or even to this industry. I've experienced similar treatment throughout my 50 years in business." She walked slowly around the table, making brief eye contact with different staff members. "What happened yesterday wasn't about me," she continued. "I'm fortunate enough to own this hotel now. I can get a room whenever I want." Her voice grew, more serious. "This is about everyone who walks through those doors and doesn't own the building. The grandmother visiting her grandchildren who gets ignored by the doorman. The black businessman assigned to the room next to the elevator despite requesting a quiet location. The Hispanic couple asked for extra ID at check-in when no one else is." Eleanor returned to her seat and opened her portfolio, revealing a stack of printed reports. "I had my team pull your customer satisfaction surveys from the past 6 months," she said. "There's a disturbing pattern here. Guests of color consistently report lower satisfaction with their check-in experience compared to white guests. Women traveling alone report feeling less valued than male business travelers." She closed the portfolio and leaned forward, her voice softening. "Now I could fire everyone involved in yesterday's incident. That would be within my rights as the owner." The tension in the room became almost unbearable. James, in particular, looked close to tears. Michael stood straighter, as if preparing to receive a professional execution. "But that's not why I'm here," Eleanor continued. "I didn't build my company by throwing people away. I built it by investing in people who are willing to learn and grow." Surprise rippled through the room. The head chef, a middle-aged woman with streaks of gray in her dark hair, raised her hand hesitantly. "Yes?" Eleanor acknowledged her. "Ms. Washington, if you don't mind me asking, what exactly are you planning to do?" Eleanor smiled. "I'm planning to make this hotel what it claims to be in all those fancy brochures. Truly welcoming to everyone." She opened her portfolio again. "Starting today, we're implementing a comprehensive training program on unconscious bias and inclusive hospitality. Everyone, and I mean everyone from the doorman to myself, will participate." She distributed copies of a document titled Excellence Through Inclusion, the Washington Standard. As staff members began looking through the material, Eleanor continued speaking. "I've also reviewed your hiring practices. I notice that while your entry-level positions reflect the diversity of this city, your management team does not. That changes today as well." She turned to the back of the room. "Diane from housekeeping, you've been here 12 years and have submitted ideas for improving efficiency that were repeatedly ignored. Starting next week, you'll lead our new service innovation team with a significant raise." A woman in her 50s, with kind eyes widened in shock before breaking into a smile. Her co-workers patted her back in congratulations. "Thomas in maintenance," Eleanor continued. Your supervisor reports that you speak 3 languages and often help international guests who are struggling to communicate their needs. I'd like you to develop a language accessibility program for the hotel." A quiet man near the window straightened with pride, nodding his acceptance of the challenge. Eleanor went through several more names, recognizing overlooked talent and assigning new responsibilities. With each announcement, the atmosphere in the room shifted from tension to something resembling hope. Finally, she turned to James, who had been staring at his hands the entire meeting. "James," she said, causing him to look up with dread in his eyes. "Yesterday you made assumptions about me based solely on my appearance. That was wrong." He nodded miserably, accepting the public reprimand. "But," Eleanor continued, "you also did something many people never managed to do. You owned your mistake directly and apologized without making excuses. That shows character worth developing." James blinked in confusion. "You'll be working directly with me for the next 2 weeks," Eleanor told him. "I want you to shadow me as I review our customer service protocols. You'll see firsthand how unconscious bias affects every aspect of the hospitality experience, and then you'll help redesign our training program." Murmurs of surprise filled the room. This was not what anyone had expected. Ms. Washington, Michael, finally spoke up, his voice unsteady. "What about me? I failed as a manager yesterday. I failed to train my staff properly, and I failed to model respectful behavior." Eleanor regarded him thoughtfully. "Yes, you did, and recognizing that is your first step toward improvement." She took a sip of her tea before continuing. "You'll retain your position, Mr. Winters, but with adjusted responsibilities. You'll spend the next month working 1 week in each department: housekeeping, maintenance, food service, and front desk. Sometimes we need to see the hotel through different eyes to truly understand it." For the next hour, Eleanor outlined her vision for transforming the Grand Monarch. She shared stories from her own journey, how she'd started cleaning rooms at a roadside motel after her husband died, leaving her with 2 small children to support. How she'd saved enough to buy that struggling motel when the owner retired. How she'd built her empire 1 property at a time, often facing closed doors and condescending treatment along the way. "I could have given up 100 times, she told them, "but instead I decided to change the industry from within. And that's what we're going to do here together." As the meeting concluded, Eleanor asked everyone to stand. This isn't just about doing the right thing morally, though that would be reason enough. This is about business excellence. Guests who feel truly welcomed become loyal customers and passionate advocates for your brand. What happened yesterday wasn't just wrong. It was bad business. She looked around the room, meeting each person's eyes directly. "I'm staying here. For the next 2 weeks, my door is open to anyone with ideas for improvement. This is day 1 of the new Grand Monarch. Let's make it count." As the staff filed out, many approached Eleanor personally, some apologizing for yesterday's events, others expressing excitement about the new direction. James waited until everyone else had left before approaching her. "Ms. Washington," he said quietly, "I want you to know how truly sorry I am. What I did was inexcusable." Eleanor studied him for a moment. "Do you know why I'm giving you a second chance, James?" He shook his head. "Because 40 years ago someone gave me one, and it changed everything." She gathered her papers. "Now, we have work to do. The first training session starts in 30 minutes. As they walked out together, Eleanor caught a glimpse of herself in the wall mirror. The reflection of a woman who had transformed an industry by refusing to let others define her worth. Now she would transform this hotel by showing its staff how to see the value in everyone who walked through their doors. Morning sunlight streamed through the windows of the Grand Monarch Hotel's presidential suite as Eleanor Washington reviewed her notes. 2 weeks had passed since that fateful evening when she'd been denied a room in her own hotel. What had started as an uncomfortable confrontation had evolved into something unexpected, a complete reinvention of the property's culture. Eleanor sipped her tea, gazing out at the city skyline. On her tablet lay the latest customer satisfaction reports, showing a modest but noticeable improvement in scores across all demographics. It wasn't revolutionary yet, but it was a start. A gentle knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, setting down her cup. James entered, carrying a thick binder and looking remarkably different from the dismissive young man who had suggested she find a budget hotel 2 weeks ago. His posture was more confident, but less arrogant, his eyes more attentive. "Good morning, Miss Washington," he said, placing the binder on the coffee table. "I've finished compiling the training materials you requested. Each department has customized modules based on their specific guest interactions." Eleanor nodded approvingly as she flipped through the pages. "This is thorough work, James. I'm impressed with how you've incorporated real scenarios from our guest feedback." "Thank you," he replied, sitting when she gestured to the chair across from her. "Working directly with the housekeeping team last week was eye-opening. I never realized how often they're treated as invisible, or how many guest requests they field that never reach the front desk. Empathy comes from experience," Eleanor said. "That's why I wanted every manager to work shifts in each department." She pointed to a section in the binder. "Tell me about this part, the scenario training." James leaned forward eagerly. "This was actually inspired by what happened with you. We're creating role-play situations where staff experience being treated differently based on perceived status or appearance. It helps them recognize bias in action rather than just talking about it in theory." Eleanor's lips curved into a smile. "And how has the staff responded?" "Honestly, at first there was resistance. Change is hard." James ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that had become familiar during their intensive work together. "But after the first few training sessions, something shifted. People started sharing their own experiences, not just employees, but their family members too. The head chef talked about her son being followed in stores. One of the bellhops described being mistaken for a valet instead of a guest at another hotel." Eleanor nodded knowingly. These were stories she'd heard and lived throughout her career. "The most powerful moment," James continued, "was when Michael worked his week in housekeeping. Remember how he complained about the heavy lifting at first? I recall him mentioning his designer shoes weren't made for pushing laundry carts." Eleanor said with a chuckle. "By the third day, he organized a team meeting to apologize for never addressing their understaffing. Yesterday, he approved hiring 3 additional housekeepers and implementing the schedule changes they've been requesting for years." Outside the window, clouds drifted across the sky, momentarily dimming the room before sunlight returned, brighter than before. It felt fitting for the transformation taking place within these walls. Eleanor rose and walked to a small cabinet, retrieving an old photograph in a simple frame. She handed it to James. "That's me, 1978, she said. "My first day as owner of the Pinewood Motel in Alabama." James studied the image of a much younger Eleanor standing proudly in front of a modest roadside establishment, 2 small children at her side. Her smile held the same determination he now recognized, though her face lacked the lines that years of struggle and triumph had since etched. "I was a 28-year-old widow with 2 children and 12 rooms to rent," Eleanor continued. "The bank only approved my loan because my late husband's brother co-signed. They wouldn't even look me in the eye during the meeting." She reclaimed the photo, gazing at it with fondness. "I cleaned those rooms myself, checked guests in, fixed broken pipes when I couldn't afford a plumber. And do you know what kept me going through those years?" James shook his head. "Every time someone underestimated me or treated me poorly because of how I looked, I promised myself I'd build something they couldn't ignore." She returned the photo to its place. "Not out of spite, but because I believed then what I still believe now. That excellence is the best response to prejudice." A soft beep from her tablet indicated an incoming message. Eleanor glanced at it and smiled. "The renovations team has finished the staff lounge," she said. "Shall we go see it?" They took the service elevator down to the basement level, where the employee areas had previously been neglected despite the luxury upstairs. When they stepped out, several staff members were already gathered outside a closed door, expressions curious. "Ms. Washington," called Diane from housekeeping, now heading the service innovation team. "Everyone's so excited to see what you've done." Eleanor gestured for her to open the door. "This wasn't my project, Diane. This was yours. You designed it based on what your colleagues said they needed. Diane beamed with pride as she pushed open the door, revealing a completely transformed space. The previously dingy break room with its wobbly tables and flickering lights had become a warm, welcoming environment with comfortable seating areas, charging stations, a fully equipped kitchen, and even a small quiet room with a daybed. For parents who need to rest during split shifts, Diane explained as staff members exclaimed over the changes. And we added lockers with built-in chargers for everyone's phones, plus actual decent coffee instead of that terrible stuff we had before. The kitchen staff had prepared refreshments for the unveiling, and as everyone explored the new space, Eleanor observed the interactions with satisfaction. Groundskeepers chatted with front desk staff they'd barely acknowledged before. The head chef was deep in conversation with a young housekeeper about recipe ideas for the new employee meal program. Michael approached Eleanor, his expression thoughtful. "When you first arrived, I thought this was about punishment," he admitted. "I was so afraid of losing my job that I couldn't see the bigger picture." "And now?" Eleanor asked. He gestured to the room full of animated, engaged employees. "Now I understand that true luxury isn't just about marble floors and expensive furniture. It's about creating an environment where everyone feels valued, guests and staff alike." As the celebration continued, Eleanor slipped away quietly. She had a flight to catch, another hotel to visit incognito in her growing portfolio. But first, she had one more stop to make. In the main lobby, she paused at the front desk where a new sign had been installed. The Washington Standard, Excellence Through Inclusion, followed by a pledge to treat every guest with equal respect and dignity. Beside it hung a framed photograph of Eleanor from 1978, standing in front of that first small motel. Below it, a simple caption read, "Judge by character, not appearance. The guest you dismiss today may own your hotel tomorrow." James found her there, admiring the display. "We wanted to surprise you," he said, slightly nervous about her reaction. "The staff voted unanimously to make your story part of our orientation for all new hires." Eleanor touched the frame gently. "It's perfect," she said softly, "but make sure they understand. This isn't just about me or my journey. It's about creating a new standard for the industry," James finished, "about making sure no guest ever feels the way you did that night." Eleanor nodded, satisfied. "In 2 months, I'll return for an unannounced visit," she told him. "Let's see if you recognize me next time." James laughed. "I promise you, Ms. Washington, no one in this hotel will ever forget your face again." As Eleanor walked toward the exit, various staff members nodded respectfully or waved goodbye. The doorman, the same one who had ignored her 2 weeks ago, rushed to help with her bags and hold the door. "Will you be returning soon, Ms. Washington?" he asked, his manner genuinely warm. "Sooner than you might expect," she replied with a knowing smile. "Keep up the good work, all of you. This transformation has only just begun." As her car pulled away from the Grand Monarch, Eleanor felt a deep satisfaction that went beyond business success. Throughout her long career, she had built hotels, but more importantly, she had built people. And sometimes the most powerful change came not from firing those who made mistakes, but from giving them the chance to grow into something better. Her phone buzzed with a text from James. "Safe travels. The team sends their thanks for not giving up on us." Eleanor smiled as she typed her reply. "Second chances are powerful. Make this one count." 6 months passed since Eleanor Washington's unforgettable visit to the Grand Monarch Hotel. The early morning sun painted golden streaks across the polished marble floors as staff members made final preparations for a special ceremony. Crystal glasses gleamed on trays. Fresh flowers adorned every surface, and a small stage had been set up in the grand ballroom with a podium bearing the hotel's newly redesigned logo. Thomas, formerly from maintenance and now head of the hotel's language accessibility program, directed a team setting up translation headsets for international guests. "Make sure we have enough for the Chinese delegation," he reminded his assistant. Their tourism board representative specifically requested to attend after hearing about our changes. Near the entrance, Diane from housekeeping, now director of service innovation, reviewed a checklist with Michael. Both wore matching lapel pins featuring the new hotel motto, "Excellence through inclusion." "The mayor confirmed he's coming," Diane said, checking off a name. "And 3 travel magazine editors. The publicity team says we're trending online after that travel blogger's video went viral." Michael nodded, straightening his tie nervously. "Hard to believe where we were just 6 months ago," he said quietly. "Remember how I used to run this place?" Diane patted his shoulder with a smile. "That wasn't just you, it was the whole industry. But look at us now." Indeed, the Grand Monarch had undergone a remarkable transformation. Beyond the physical renovations, which included making a quarter of the rooms fully accessible for guests with disabilities, the most significant changes were invisible to the casual observer, but felt by everyone who walked through the doors. Every staff member, from the newest dishwasher to the executive team, had completed Eleanor's comprehensive training program. Guest satisfaction scores had risen dramatically across all demographics. Industry publications had begun writing about the Washington Method as a new gold standard in hospitality management. James, now serving as guest relations manager, paced near the main entrance, checking his watch repeatedly. "Any word from Ms. Washington?" he asked the front desk supervisor. "Her assistant confirmed she landed last night, but you know how she is," the supervisor replied with a knowing smile. "Always keeping us on our toes." James chuckled. Since Eleanor's first visit, the hotel had become accustomed to her surprise appearances in various disguises, once as an elderly tourist with a cane, another time as a harried business traveler, and most memorably as a food delivery driver who managed to access 3 different floors before anyone questioned her presence. Each visit tested whether the staff's new training was holding up, whether they treated every person with equal respect regardless of appearance. The ballroom. Doors opened at precisely 10 a.m., admitting a stream of well-dressed guests. Local business leaders mingled with travel industry representatives and hotel staff members who weren't on duty. A group of hospitality management students from the local university hovered near the refreshment table, clutching notebooks eagerly. At 10:30, a hush fell over the room as the lights dimmed slightly. Michael stepped onto the stage, approaching the microphone with newfound confidence. "Distinguished guests, colleagues, friends," he began, his voice steady. 6 months ago, the Grand Monarch Hotel received a visitor who changed everything. Most of you know the story by now, how our owner Eleanor Washington arrived incognito and was shamefully denied the respect she deserved. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. What happened next surprised everyone, especially those of us who were directly involved. Michael paused, his expression serious. Instead of firing us, which she had every right to do, Ms. Washington chose to transform us. Today we celebrate not just our hotel's receipt of the prestigious Hospitality Excellence Award, but the journey that brought us here. He gestured to a large screen behind him where photographs began to appear. Staff members engaged in training sessions, working in different departments, participating in community outreach programs Eleanor had established. "The Washington Method isn't complicated," Michael continued. "It's about seeing people, really seeing them, regardless of how they look, what they wear, or where they come from. It's about creating an environment where every guest and every employee feels valued." As Michael spoke, the main doors opened, quietly, and an elegant woman in her 70s slipped in unnoticed by most. Eleanor Washington moved to the back of the room, content to observe rather than draw attention. She watched with pride as Michael continued his speech, noting how much he'd grown from the defensive, image-obsessed manager she'd first encountered. "Today, our occupancy rates are up 20%, he announced. "Our employee retention has improved by 30%, and our guest satisfaction scores are the highest they've ever been. But numbers only tell part of the story." He gestured to James, who joined him on stage. "I'd like to invite our guest relations manager to share what these changes have meant on a personal level." James adjusted the microphone, surveying the attentive faces before him. 6 months ago, I was the receptionist who suggested Ms. Washington might be more comfortable at a budget hotel down the street." His candor drew a few surprised gasps from guests unfamiliar with the full story. I made assumptions, based solely on her appearance, he continued. I was wrong, and I'm deeply grateful that Ms. Washington saw potential in me that I didn't see in myself. From her position in the back, Eleanor smiled softly. Working closely with her taught me that true hospitality isn't about treating important people well, James said. It's about recognizing that everyone who walks through our doors deserves respect. That philosophy has completely changed how I approach my work and, honestly, how I move through the world. As James returned to his seat, Michael introduced other staff members who shared brief stories about the changes they'd witnessed or implemented. Thomas described a Japanese family who had been moved to tears when hotel staff greeted them in their native language. Diane explained how housekeeping turnover had plummeted after implementing staff recommendations for more humane scheduling. Finally, Michael returned to the podium. And now, I'm honored to introduce the visionary behind these changes. A woman who built an empire from a single motel, who transformed an industry through persistence and excellence, and who taught us all that second chances are powerful gifts. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our owner and inspiration, Ms. Eleanor Washington. The crowd erupted in applause as all eyes turned expectantly toward the stage entrance. Seconds passed, but no one appeared. Michael looked confused until a voice spoke from the back of the room. I believe the point of my first visit was that you shouldn't make assumptions about where important people might be standing. The crowd parted as Eleanor made her way forward, her warm smile taking any sting out of her words. When she reached the stage, Michael embraced her with genuine affection before yielding the podium. Eleanor surveyed the room thoughtfully before speaking. When I started in this industry nearly 50 years ago, I was often the only person who looked like me in the room. I was certainly the only black woman owner at industry conferences. She adjusted her glasses. I would love to tell you that things changed quickly, that merit and hard work were all that mattered. But the truth is more complicated. The room hung on her every word, especially the university students furiously taking notes. Progress comes in fits and starts. Sometimes it takes a shock to the system, like being denied a room in your own hotel, to reveal what still needs changing. Her voice carried warmth despite the serious subject. What happened here 6 months ago wasn't unique. It happens every day to people without the power to do anything about it. She gestured toward the staff members seated in the front row. What is unique is how this team responded. They could have approached our new training with resentment or mere compliance. Instead, they embraced it with open hearts and minds. Eleanor picked up the Crystal Award that sat on the podium, the Hospitality Excellence Award, the industry's highest honor. This recognition isn't just about improved metrics, though those are certainly impressive, she said, holding up the award so it caught the light. It's about creating a new standard for the industry. The fact that hospitality management programs across the country are now teaching the Washington method tells me we're moving in the right direction. She set the award down and looked directly at the crowd. This isn't just a feel-good story about an elderly black woman teaching a lesson. It's about creating systems where everyone thrives, guests, employees, and businesses alike. Inclusion isn't just morally right, it's good business. As Eleanor concluded her remarks, the applause was deafening. Industry leaders lined up to speak with her while reporters requested interviews. The university students surrounded Michael and James, eager to learn more about implementing similar programs elsewhere. Later that evening, after the celebration had concluded, Eleanor sat in a quiet corner of the hotel restaurant with her executive team. The formal speeches were done, and now they spoke candidly about the future. We've developed something special here, Eleanor said, looking around the table at faces that had become dear to her over the past months. But one hotel isn't enough. I want to implement these changes across every property in our portfolio. James leaned forward eagerly. The training materials are ready to scale. We've documented everything and created video modules based on our experiences. And I've had inquiries from 3 competing hotel chains, Michael added. They want a license. Our training program. Eleanor nodded, pleased but not surprised. This was never just about us. It was about changing an industry that desperately needs changing. She raised her glass in a toast to second chances and the courage to make them count. As they clinked glasses, Eleanor gazed around the restaurant where guests of all backgrounds were being served with equal attention and respect. Her mind drifted back to that little roadside motel where she'd started, to all the doors that had been closed in her face over the decades, to the long journey that had led her here. Sometimes, she reflected, the most powerful response to prejudice wasn't revenge or resentment, but building something so excellent it couldn't be ignored. The true legacy of that uncomfortable night 6 months ago wasn't just a transformed hotel or even an industry award. It was the ripple effect of changed perspectives spreading outward, touching lives she would never even know. Tomorrow I'm visiting our Chicago property incognito, she announced with a mischievous smile. Anyone want to guess what disguise I'll wear this time? As laughter erupted around the table, Eleanor felt the deep satisfaction of knowing that her work, both the empire she'd built and the changes she'd inspired, would continue long after she was gone. That was a legacy worth building, one respectful interaction at a time.